the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg, he seems to accidentally have gotten texted some war plans. This is something that was so bizarre, this text chain. He thought it might have been fake until the bombs actually started falling on Yemen. And on that text chain, there were big names like Vice President J.D. Vance. There was the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, starting to talk about bombing the Houthis in Yemen. And after those bombs did drop, the chain started celebrating, saying things like, good job, Pete, to you and your team. Mike Waltz, the team in Mao did a great job, great work. A lot of emojis, as you see. Today in Congress, senators seemed pretty shocked by all of this.
Holy crap. I mean, when this level of detail is being shared on a non-classified network, and this isn't the first time we've seen this sloppiness from this administration. This level of detail on just a signal message chain, it's mind-boggling.
Just a few moments ago, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, talked the first time publicly since this entire story broke, but he didn't talk about the alleged classified information that was shared. Instead, he attacked the journalist who it was shared with.
You're talking about a deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's made a profession of peddling hoaxes time and time again, to include the hoaxes of Russia, or the fine people on both sides hoax, or suckers and losers hoax. So this is the guy that peddles in garbage. This is what he does. Nobody was texting war plans, and that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, but all this was happening as other news was breaking on the legal showdowns between the administration and federal judges. That's continuing tonight with the D.C. Appeals Court hearing arguments in that deportation case under the Aliens Enemies Act, which deported over 200 Venezuelans to El Salvador last week, all while the temporary protected status of Venezuelans in the United States hangs in the balance right now. We've got more on that coming up shortly. Meanwhile, the Trump administration, the Trump White House, is now asking the Supreme Court to stop lower courts from forcing agencies to rehire workers that have been laid off by DOGE, while Elon Musk is sitting in cabinet meetings, the latest one just today, to tout DOGE's efforts to cut back on government spending. Obviously, lots to get here, so let's start with NBC News White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard. Vaughn, okay, so all of this happening on Signal. It's an app that I've got on my phone. I know you have it on your phone. Like, let's start here. Are government officials using Signal to communicate like this instead of their secure lines, their skiffs, like all the official channels?
Right. That is what is objectively startling about this, and why Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief, even said himself that he did not think it was real and that he was being set up to fall for an effective scam, because he could not believe that the Vice President of the United States, as well as the Pentagon Secretary and National Security Advisor, would be, number one, communicating this way over Signal, but then discussing imminent war plans and attacks. That is what took him off guard. And we have heard from lawmakers, Republicans and Democrats, who have suggested that this is, on the Republican side, it needs to be looked into and shouldn't happen again. Democrats say that there should be individuals fired for this. Of course, all of this is striking because if you go back 8 years ago, just the amount of attention that then Secretary Hillary Clinton received and scrutiny for using her BlackBerry cell phone and a private email account. And yet so much of that criticism was coming from some of the very key individuals like Pete Hegseth today, who are now the ones questioning the actions of Hillary Clinton 8 years ago. But of course, the paramount concern are those active military servicemen and women who could have been in harm's way if an adversary were to have been able to breach and be a part of these conversations that the Atlantic's Jeffrey Goldberg was a part of.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if we're talking about this in 8 years. And yet the White House, they are saying that this conversation is legit, right? Like, what's their response to questions about just the security breach aspect of all this?
Right. The National Security Council said that they are going to initiate an inquiry into this here and acknowledged the veracity, the authenticity of this signal thread in the conversation that took place. The President of the United States earlier this afternoon, when he was first asked about it, well, he didn't seem to, at least in his own telling, know about it. Take a listen.
I don't know anything about it. I'm not a big fan of The Atlantic. To me, it's a magazine that's going out of business. I think it's not much of a magazine, but I know nothing about it. You're saying that they had what?
They were using Signal to coordinate on sensitive materials and
having to do with what? Having to do with what? What were they talking about?
With the Houthis.
The Houthis? You mean the attack on the Houthis? Right. Well, it couldn't have been very effective because the attack was very effective. I can tell you that. I don't know anything about it. You're telling me about it for the first time.
Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, is actually out on his first overseas trip to Asia. He just took off earlier today. National Security Council or National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, the individual who actually brought Jeffrey Goldberg into this signal thread. Of course, there's a lot of scrutiny and a lot of questions here still ahead, Gotti.
Yeah, and I got to say, like, I am very fascinated by the insight that all of this has given us. Like, at first, VP Vance is pushing back against the strikes, it looks like, from these texts. And that's because it ran against the let Europe defend itself messaging from the president. And then there was all this ragging on Europe for what they called freeloading. Like, how is this going to go down with our allies?
Right, and that's where J.D. Vance, he suggested on this group text that effectively it ran counter towards the administration's positioning on Europe because the reasoning for the attacks on the Houthis was because the Houthis have repeatedly attacked vessels in the Red Sea. And J.D. Vance was making the case that just about 3% of U.S. trade actually runs through the Suez Canal, as opposed to, in his numbers, 40% for Europe, making the case that this should be an initiative taken on by Europe as opposed to the administration. Of course, they went forward with the attacks anyways there, but that was where you heard the vice president with the likes of the Pentagon, the Secretary of National Security Advisor, but also the Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, openly having a conversation about whether to tell President Donald Trump about the deliberations and whether their belief that it ran counter to their position on Europe. So really, it is quite a conversation to have be brought to light in this sort of capacity.
All complete with emojis, including, I guess, the rest of us with the eyes wide open emoji. Von Hilliard, thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.